Welcome back. Let's go ahead and continue on with our hyper-realistic eye drawing. So we are on step number 5. And for step number 5, we are going to be coloring in a lot like we did when we were coloring in our pupil. This time our direction is that spoke-like pattern. And we're going to fill the entire inner iris. And this value is going to be a little bit darker than that outer iris because remember we used our soft blending technique where we just transferred leftover graphite from our tissue to the outer iris. So this is just a light shading with your pencil, and even though it's a light shading, it'll be just a hair darker than what you have in the outer iris. But I'm doing the best that I can to keep it colored in nice, and again, I'm moving that paper around as I'm coloring in, just like I did when I was adding the second layer of texture on the outer iris. This time I'm just adding my first layer of texture on the inner iris. And I'm almost back to the beginning. So now you can see I'm beginning to work the layers of that inner iris. For step number 6, I need to do a little bit more work to the inner iris. So now I'm going to go back to my blending tool. And remember, I'm always going to make sure that I'm putting some of that graphite in the same area. That way it's really moving it around. And now I want to create this undulating texture from a line texture to a blended texture. And again, I'm going to keep that spoke-like pattern. But now I'm going to take that inner iris and I'm just going to blend some of these lines. Again, not all of them, because I want it to go from a bumpier pattern to a more blended pattern, just some of them. And again, I'm working that spoke. It's adding to that starburst effect that I see everybody trying to draw. So that's it. That's it for step number 6. For step number 7, we're going to start to show that this outer iris really is on top of the inner iris. So that means that this edge is going to cast a shadow down in here. So anywhere that this edge of the inner iris pops outward, you're just going to add a little bit of graphite. So go ahead and color back and forth. And you need to go back and forth a couple of times. You should be able to see that darker area. But remember, it's only darker because of the layers. And it's important that you keep these light layers so that you can move them. But you can see I'm coming down just a little bit from the curved edge there with a really light layer. Again, super, super light. It's all those layers building up that's making it appear dark. But this is super light because I'm going to have to blend it around on this paper. So I don't want to press too hard. I won't be able to blend. Ooh, these little shadows are going to run right into each other. It's going to be a really cool effect. So now that I've darkened up those shadows where the outer iris is literally on top of the inner iris, as usual, I'm going to go back to my blending tool, and I just want to blend them just a little bit so they don't stand out quite so much. But again, I don't want to blend away some of that beautiful texture that I had. So I'm just careful just to blend those little edges. No longer than what I need to. There you go. So now I have this nice smooth effect. And you can kind of see it does look like that's a hole. We're getting down into there because this part is literally on top of the other part. So now that we're done with step number 7, we're ready to go ahead and move on to step number 8. So I've been telling you to make sure that you're keeping your graphite in the same area because now we're ready for the third layer of texture on the outer iris. And the reason we're doing it right now is because we just added a little bit there. We blended some of it here. So we're going to use what we have between that edge and between our blender. We're going to pull a spoke-like pattern here in the outer iris of those really pretty blended spokes. So there you go. You can see it happening here. And again, I want to make sure that it's not a total pattern. So if you have a couple that are closer together and then a bigger space between your next one, that's totally okay. So for step number 7, we've created a soft blended spoke-like pattern on the outer edge of that outer iris. Now for step number 9, we're going to go ahead and we're going to clean up this outer edge by just giving it one more layer and blending that layer on the outer edge. So again, I'm not pressing hard. You guys know by now that the only reason this appears so dark is because I have those 3 other layers underneath it. Remember, we've been working on these irises for a while. So I'm just creating this really, really light layer, just darkening up this outside edge of the iris. And then once I darken it, I just want to go ahead and blend it with my blender. So I'm going all the way around. Now I can't see the top of the iris there. It's underneath the eyelid. So I'm just going to stop there because this is the actual shadow right on your eye. Once you have that blended, I didn't give you a new step for this, but I mean, essentially you just colored it. So now go ahead and just take your blender and blend that edge. And at this point, if you notice that this line isn't blending in any way, you need to lighten up your pencil pressure. When I say that I'm coloring lightly, I'm coloring really, really lightly. I'm just putting layers and layers on it. But now you can see that I have that nice smoothed outer edge. The last thing that I want to have you guys do for today, for steps 5 through 10, is I want you to pull in some highlights. So let me introduce you to your highlight making tool. It's this guy. So up until now, you've probably used your eraser to get rid of things, but it's actually a great drawing tool, and it's used to draw super light highlights, like highlights that are the lightest possible gray you can get. So to do that, we're going to take this inner iris area. We're going to be using the edge of our eraser. And you're actually going to draw highlight lines that go from the pupil to the edge of the inner iris using your eraser. So just like you were putting in those other textural lines that were shadows that were a little bit darker before, now you're going to use your eraser and you're going to add some highlights because we've been adding shadows. So now we want to add some highlights. And again, I'm making sure that they're not totally even and not perfectly spaced, but now I have some highlights that go all the way around the edge, from the edge of the pupil to the edge of the inner iris. And then that's it for today. You've gotten to step number 10. So tune in for more.